Washington's budget and income tax on millionaires pass. Georgia looking to eliminate their income tax. America's talking, and Illinois in focus. This is the Center Square Daily for Friday, March 13th, 2026. Another Friday the 13th. Hopefully you can find some luck out there. I'm Greg Bishop, your host, and we start in Washington State. We're in the final hours of their legislative session. State lawmakers passing budgets on Thursday to fill a multi-billion-dollar hole with new taxes, reserves spending, and one-time transfers, plus some cuts. Let's take a look exactly what they passed for their two-year budgets for 2025-2027, $77.9 billion to $80.2 billion in spending. Transportation spending going from $15.6 billion to $16.7 billion, and capital spending increasing from $7.5 billion to $8.5 billion. Now, one measure that was part of the contentious debates in Washington state included a provision to tax the income of millionaires, and the House debating that measure for over 24 hours straight before sending it to the governor's desk. Now, Washington state residents have rejected an income tax on the ballot 10 times over the last century. We're going to be talking in more detail about that with Carlene Johnson, the Center Square Associate Editor out of Washington Monday. So be sure to put that on your calendar and join us then. But during the legislative session in Washington, Democrats also eliminated tax exemptions for prescription drug providers and data centers, providing a little more money to help Democrats ultimately expand spending by $2 billion. And as the team from the Center Square reports, in Washington, almost half of that is to help pay for the state's rising legal liability, which the legislature struggled to address in their session. Now let's hear some of the debate on the floor of the Senate in Washington state about that income tax proposal that would tax millionaires more than 9% on their income of over $1 million. Democrat Noel Frayne and Republican Mark Schulzler, they debated this into the Washington Senate floor.
But I do think that over the next couple of years before this fully goes into effect, this tax is not effective until January 1st of 28, with collections not coming in until 2029. We have this advisory work group that's going into place. I really hope that once this has passed, that we can focus on getting it right for the people and businesses of Washington state.
I represent the wealthiest districts in Spokane County. You look at my map from Idaho around, $1 million homes left and right. And we're going to give their kids a free meal. So we're going to give rich kids free meals out of an unconstitutional income tax based on this.
Again, the question of the constitutionality of the income tax provision that was approved, that's going to last for months and months, and as you saw there in the debate, the provision not taking into effect for several more years. So between now and then, you can expect a lot of updates from the Center Square reporters out of Washington state. But as they continue to report on that, Democrats saying that it's the right move. Washington State Senator Jamie Peterson praising the passage of the income tax provision on millionaires.
We passed the Millionaires tax, which is going to make sure that small businesses are getting the biggest tax break in history. People are not going to be paying sales tax anymore when it goes into effect on grooming and hygiene products, on over-the-counter medicines, on diapers, adult or baby diapers. We have a way to fix an upside-down tax system that's been plaguing us for 90 years and provide adequate revenue that we can make investments in things that the people of our state care about.
Now, a big question in this ongoing debate, and likely going to spill out into the courts as well, is how it will impact small businesses. The National Federation of Independent Business, representing small businesses all across the country, and they have Washington State Director Patrick Connor raising concerns about how this measure Washington passed in the final hours of their legislative session will impact those small businesses in Washington state.
We're particularly concerned about the millionaire tax because we believe that it targets small business owners, specifically those businesses that are organized as what they call a pass-through entity, meaning that an individual business owner reports their business income as well as losses on their personal income tax form. So sometimes fairly easily, a business could have gross receipts in excess of $1 million. However, those business owners are taking home a salary that is far, far lower than that $1 million threshold.
Clearly, some of the questions will persist even after any kind of court battles that are ongoing from that particular provision in Washington state. But Washington Governor Bob Ferguson saying it is just one of the many things that he pushed for to get across the finish line.
The millionaires tax, obviously, I called for adopting that and was specific that, hey, we need to put a significant amount of the revenue from the millionaires tax back in the pockets of Washingtonians and business owners. And by any fair measure, they did that as well. I say the state, I specifically called out the working families tax credit to increase that, and they increased it to the tune of adding 460,000 families across our state will now receive the working families tax credit check literally in the mail between $300 and $1,300. Big tax break for business owners, and all the other things you saw in the millionaires tax of dollars back in the pockets of Washingtonians.
Now, the question again, will this stand constitutional challenge? Be sure to get the newsletter in your inbox, including headlines from Washington state, by going to thecentersquare.com. Washington, again, not having an income tax, but passing a provision to tax millionaires more than 9% on their income. And from Washington looking to do just that to the Peach State, wanting to get rid of their income tax, let's now talk with the Center Square Associate Editor, Kim Jarrett, about what could be happening to Georgia taxpayers. Kim, thanks for taking time with us. Things are still rolling and pieces are being put together, but looks like Georgia legislators are eyeing getting rid of the state income tax there. What's the latest?
Well, they had crossover day last week, which was on Friday, which these bills had to get through their respective chambers to make it through the legislature. The Senate had meetings all summer long about eliminating the income tax. They met with stakeholders, they met with businesses, they met with everyday citizens, a woman who said, hey, it would help me buy formula for my child. And they came up with a plan in January that says, okay, what we want to do is reduce this gradually and move to zero state income tax in 6 years. The problem with that, and what there have been some questions raised since they announced this plan, is how are you going to pay for it? The income tax brings in about $16 billion in Georgia. We got a copy of the fiscal note of the bill and looked at it, and their plan initially is to take away some of the tax breaks that they give to businesses. Some of them are interesting, very little known tax breaks, like a tax break on boat parts for yachts that you might not have even known about. So that was their initial thing. But the fiscal note says that's only going to bring in possibly, I think, at $1.8 billion. So as they're moving toward this, yes, who doesn't want to have their income tax removed? But there are questions being raised from experts, the Tax Foundation, about how is Georgia going to pay for this?
Yeah, one of the big questions about taxation, some say it's the state's money, but really, I mean, that's coming out of taxpayers' pockets to pay for all of this. And I'm sure there's going to be, if there hasn't already been, part of the debate from each side of the argument on this as to, well, who's better to spend those dollars? Should taxpayers be able to keep that money and spend it in the economy, generating more revenue for, say, sales taxes and such, or is it best to have the government control how those dollars are spent? So I imagine, Kim, that's going to be an ongoing debate. But to that fiscal note, you did share with us that copy, and we've got a graphic here. And for people who look at these types of things, maybe you can help kind of, shed some light on that. And we're looking at these numbers here. They're in parentheses. That means negative, right? And those are in millions, which if you look, it's 1.2 billion there on that first line. How much are we talking about here in possible negative outcome for Georgia tax revenue?
Well, it looks like right now with just that, and all they have in the fiscal note is that one tax break. It does not cover the $16 billion that they're going to have to make up. And that's been the big question. In fact, when this bill passed in February, when it first passed the Senate, there wasn't even a fiscal note. If for people who don't do this like you and I do every day, Greg, a fiscal note on the bill basically explains what the impact is going to be to state revenues.
And you got to think, if they're going to get rid of an income tax, that's a significant impact. Yeah, $16 billion, and that's annually.
Yes, and we talked to Daniel, Dr. Daniel Canso at the Georgia Budget and Public Policy Institute. He says that is the biggest question: is you can't just, and even the Tax Foundation, they've said, In fact, they call the proposal kind of nearsighted. Georgia, another thing to go along with this is Georgia's been in an amazing fiscal position for a long time. They got over the Great Recession. I don't know many states where you could say, hey, we gave our taxpayers back a $250 tax break if you're single, $500 if you're married. Georgia's done that for the past 2 or 3 years because they've had so much of a surplus. So they have been giving back to taxpayers. The argument for getting rid of the income tax is largely competitiveness. Tennessee, to the north of Georgia, does not have an income tax, but Tennessee has an extremely high sales tax. And I cover Tennessee as well. A lot of talks in Tennessee about how reliant Tennessee is on the sales tax for their revenue. I don't cover Florida. I don't know as much about Florida, but Florida does not have an income tax. But I'm surmising tourism brings in a lot of money there. So, states are different. And looking at Georgia, we have, it's anywhere between 43% to 48% of the total state revenue every year comes from the income tax. So yeah, who doesn't want to not have to pay income tax? But down the road, somewhere that money has got to be made up.
Especially if you have years of spending at certain levels and programs that people are relying on, and if you're going to remove a substantial portion of that revenue that's coming into a state, policymakers are going to have to grapple with that. But as you said, Tennessee not having a income tax, and there's a handful of states across the country that don't have an income tax. Alaska, Florida, as you mentioned, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Wyoming. Again, these states that are seeing more people move into those states, some saying it's because of the taxation issue. So yeah, you can see how maybe Georgia has Tennessee and Florida nearby, and they want to be competitive.
And you have other states, I think North Carolina is one of them, who are also reducing the state income tax rate, which is also something that we have done. It was over 5. We're in the process of reducing it down. I think their current proposal was one proposal floating in the House right now that did pass that would gradually take it down to 3.99% because Georgia has that flat tax that they enacted a few years ago where it's a percentage. So you have a lot. It's not like Georgia is not trying to reduce taxes. It's just a question of where's the money going to come from? Is this feasible? And what will it do to us in the long term? We all know that inflation is affecting state government as well. Also, there's not as much money there. COVID dollars that were just giving states were just awash in money for a long time because of COVID dollars. Well, those are almost spent. And then we're seeing the effects of inflation and revenues are a bit down. So you're not only, if you take away the income tax, you've got other things that you have to wrestle with in the future.
No question. Kim, as you said, you watch a lot of what's going on as associate editor for the Center Square in Georgia and Tennessee. And there's another story you had this week out of Georgia that I think is rather fascinating. You found a lawmaker who didn't report his pay while they were collecting unemployment benefits.
We have had 3 state lawmakers who have been charged with making false statements in relation to pandemic unemployment fraud. Dexter Sharper, who pleaded guilty this week, is the 3rd. We also had Karen Bennett. She pleaded guilty back in January to the same charge. And we also have another one, Sharon Henderson. She was a state representative who was charged back in December for not reporting her pandemic unemployment benefits that she was getting. All of the cases are different. With Sharon Henderson, she did not resign her seat. The governor suspended her from her House of Representatives seat. So now she's running for Senate. She has not pleaded guilty to the charges as of yet. She claimed she was a substitute teacher when the pandemic hit, and she filed for benefits in the summer and said, I should get them. But according to prosecutors, no, substitute teachers are not eligible for unemployment. In the case of Karen Bennett, she was working for a church and not reporting it. And so she pleaded guilty, and she will be sentenced actually on April 15th. And Dexter Sharper, the latest person who did not report his benefits, didn't report that he was making money as a state representative, also said that he wasn't making money from a party rental business, according to the indictment. And at one point that made like over $2,000 a week. There are already plea deals in place for Ms. Bennett and for Mr. Sharper, and those plea deals do not include jail time, but they are going to have to pay back more than $10,000 each to the Georgia Department of Labor.
It's pretty remarkable. And obviously, when these headlines happen, people can find them at thecentersquare.com. Kim, greatly appreciate it. And we'll have to keep an eye on what happens in Georgia, in particular with whether or not they're actually going to make that move and pull the trigger to get rid of the state income tax over the span of several years. So we'll be looking for your stories in the future. All right, now it's time for America's Talking, and we're going to focus in on one story in particular that wraps in nearly half of the country's attorneys general questioning funding for organizations that are using certain climate agenda in manuals for judges. As the Center Square is reporting this morning, 24 state attorneys general writing to the secretaries of Transportation, Energy, and War, asking them to investigate the federal taxpayer funding of two particular organizations due to the group's refusal to take action on a politically biased climate chapter in a reference manual that's used by judges. Now, the attorneys arguing such impartiality could impact the integrity of the judicial system. Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen, who leads the effort, told the Center Square contributor Tate Miller that taxpayer dollars should not be used to fund efforts that impartially influence judges. And he also went on to say, given multiple opportunities, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and the National Science Foundation still refuse to take responsibility for publishing what, Knudsen said, is a biased climate science manual violating their public commitments and legal obligations. Now, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine was founded to advise government on issues related to science, engineering, and medicine, while the National Science Foundation, the NSF, is an independent federal agency that was started to support science and engineering all across the nation. Knudsen told the Center Square the organizations producing these manuals and pushing their climate agendas on judges must be investigated, and all funding to them should be stopped. He went on to say, as Attorney General, he'll continue to sound the alarm until they put an end to what he called a deception. Now, in February, 21 states attorneys general, they requested that the organizations remove a climate science section from their manuals, expressing concern over tax dollars being used to promote various partisan ideologies. As the Center Square is reporting, following those concerns being raised, the Federal Judicial Center removed the chapter from its online version of the manual, but NASM nor NSF took action. The CEO of the American Energy Institute, Jason Isaac, telling the Center Square that omitting one chapter does not fix a manual that was built around litigation-driven climate narratives from the start. The entire fourth edition should be rescinded, they said, and third edition until Congress completes a full investigation on how activist lawyers and advocacy groups were allowed to shape guidance relied upon by federal judges, Isaac said. This obviously is impacting a lot of different states, with the 24 states with their attorneys general signing on to the letter. And those states include Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Nebraska, and the list goes on all the way down to Wyoming. In their letter, the attorneys general called on Congress to investigate NSF's and NASM's violations of their duties and commitments, according to the letter. They say by engaging in the biased process that produced the chapter for these manuals, these two organizations violated their public commitments and statutory duties. They say that both organizations claim that objectivity is an essential part of science and scientific integrity, but the chapter, they say, is designed to look at the climate science that a lot of people object to. NASM has not responded to the Center Square's request for comment, while NSF declined to comment. Again, this is a story that's impacting 24 states, and it's interesting to see because you typically have the more Democrat-controlled states that have been at loggerheads with the Trump administration over a variety of things, 50-plus lawsuits about funding, about different types of policies concerning transgender issues and Medicaid dollars and SNAP funding. But here you've got more conservative-leaning states worried about climate science that they say is biased being given to judges in a judge's manual. So be sure to get that story and plenty of others at thecentersquare.com. And that's America's Talking here for the Center Square Daily. I'm Greg Bishop, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Center Square Daily. Now let's put Illinois in focus as we continue talking with candidates for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Illinois U.S. Senator Dick Durbin. Let's talk now with Jeannie Evans, who's one of 6 candidates on the ballot for this primary coming up on Tuesday. Jeannie, thanks for taking time with us. And let's go ahead and get right on into it. For people who are not familiar with who you are, you're on the ballot. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I think in Illinois, people are struggling with high prices, high crime. Democrat leadership has not solved those problems for us, and people are looking for a fresh voice, someone who will innovate to make our communities safer and bring down prices so people can afford housing and to put food on the table and pay their electric bill. I am a political outsider. I graduated from Harvard Law School. I've spent my career as a lawyer, taking on powerful corporations to level the playing field for small businesses and to bring down prices for Americans. I do antitrust work. I sue companies for price fixing so that we break up illegal monopolies, we promote competition in the markets, and we bring down prices. And I think that's what people are looking for. A lot of candidates are talking about affordability. Voters are talking about affordability, and I bring the skills and experience to do that. I've been very successful. I've recovered billions of dollars for American families. I've worked hand in hand with the Department of Justice on these issues. I have been named one of the top antitrust enforcement lawyers in the country. So I'm very excited to bring my knowledge and skills to Washington to take on industries like healthcare, where there's a lot of anti-competitive structures, try to remove those and bring down prices dramatically.
Now, of course, Republicans taking a Republican ballot March 17th. Many probably already have voted early, with the state having 40 days to vote early in the land of Lincoln. So for those who haven't voted, they've got 6 choices on there. What separates you from the other candidates?
I want Illinois voters to know that I am a conservative Republican that shares their Christian values, their family values. I was blessed with wonderful parents who raised me in a Christian home to love the gospel and to love the Constitution of the United States. My father read to me from the Constitution as a child. He read me the Federalist Papers as a child at bedtime stories. He's read me, as a young person, economic theory. So I'm very rooted in freedom, free markets, free enterprise, and those conservative principles of trying to reduce the size of government, lowering taxes, and letting people decide how to spend their own money rather than taxing people and then trying to spend that money on their behalf. I think people can figure out how to spend it themselves. So I want to work with our president and the current administration to peel back a lot of the regulations on businesses that are making it hard for them to thrive. So we want to cut red tape, cut taxes, so businesses can be successful. They can create jobs, innovate, and create opportunities for people in Illinois and across our country. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. My husband and I have been married for 32 years. We have raised our family on the south side of Chicago, where my husband works, and where I've worked as a lawyer. And our 4 kids attended Chicago public schools. We've been active in our Christian church community on the south side, and we've had great experiences, but we've also seen the devastating impacts of crime. We've had loved ones who have lost friends, family to crime, and who are fed up with Democrat leadership that is not making their communities safer. So I am somebody who will support law enforcement. I will work to get them the resources and tools they need to do their job, to see that we have the staffing levels, not just in Chicago, but I will be representing the entire state, and I will be working to increase the staffing levels so that we can make our communities safe. I'm ready to go to Washington and to work for the American people. I've been tough in the courtroom. I've been tough negotiating settlements for my clients, and I've gotten great results, and I want to get great results for the American people.
We're talking with Jeannie Evans. She is one of the 6 candidates running for the Republican nomination to fill the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Democrat Dick Durbin, who's been in Congress for decades. Jeannie, you've got, of course, a lot of different issues that you're going to be grappling if you do get past the primary and pass the November election. One of those being the ongoing conflict in Iran. Should that be declared a war? And what are your thoughts on this?
I want to give my overriding position is that we do need to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Iran, the regime in Iran has been exporting terrorism around the world. They've been the primary funder of the major terrorists in our world, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. The data is that they're funding they're responsible for about 90% of their funding. And we do need to cut that off. And this is a religious ideology in Iran that preaches death to America and that they want to destroy Israel, destroy America. And I think we have to take seriously that if they had nuclear weapons, they might use them and they might use them against us. They had already gotten intermediate ballistic missiles. We cannot let them get long-range ballistic missiles that could hit the United States. We cannot let them enrich uranium and make those warheads that they could put on those missiles and hit the United States. We cannot let them get nuclear bombs. This had to happen. They're just a regime that cannot get nuclear weapons, and our president is correct that we had to take action to stop them. And I think that the intelligence they were getting is that they were too close and we had to stop it.
Another big issue senators are facing right now, you got the Save America Act that President Donald Trump is urging Congress to pass. The House has already passed it, and now the Senate's dealing with it. But I do want you to sound off on voter ID. But first, let's talk about the filibuster. What are your thoughts on that, and should that be something that's done away with in the U.S. Senate?
I'll take both of these issues. So I do support voter ID. I think the majority of the country does. I think the polling is that both Republicans and Democrats, we have, I think, an average of the whole country of 80% supports voter ID. They want to know that their vote counts, that the only people who are voting are those that are authorized to vote, and we want to have secure elections and have faith in our elections. So I think that's important. In terms of the filibuster, I do believe that the founders, I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the founding. I believe they were wise. And I think one of the structures of the Senate is such that it does slow things down a little bit so that we can get consensus on issues. Without the filibuster, it's easier to pass legislation for the party in power, but it also has less support, and it's easy to overturn the next time. There's less support behind it. And so I think part of our system, it's frustrating for those in power who want to get their agenda accomplished, but they're at some point they're going to be in the minority and wish that they had some ability to stop legislation moving too quickly if it doesn't have full, broader support.
Talking with Jeannie Evans, again, a candidate for U.S. Senate for the Republicans on the March 17th ballots, and that is just a handful of days away here. You've got a whole host of other things that we could talk about for hours about Illinois, but one thing that I think is important taxpayers need to know is your position on whether President Trump should withhold federal tax dollars from the state of Illinois for a variety of reasons, like, Illinois having no cash bail, Illinois having certain policies concerning transgender ideology, or, SNAP dollars to possibly require, the state taxpayers to make up the difference. Where do you stand on using the power of the purse from Congress to get policy changes out of a state like Illinois?
Big picture is that Illinois government needs to care more about the people than they care about fighting Trump. I think we have under Governor Pritzker and his Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton, we have leadership that cares more about fighting Trump than getting things done for the people of Illinois. If I were elected, I would be building unity. I'd be building unity within the Republican Party, building unity among Republicans and Democrats to work with the federal government. If the federal government has money and funding and resources for us, we want to take advantage of it. We want to use it. We want to welcome it. We want to talk to the president, say, thanks for giving us resources. Let's talk about the best way to use them. Let's talk about what you have to offer and what is going to work best for the people of Illinois. And I would be working to make that happen and getting the resources that we can in a way that we want them and that we can use them on a long-term basis.
You mentioned one of the more recognizable names on the Democrat side. They've got 10 candidates that Democrats have to choose from in the March 17th primary. That if you were to advance out of the March primary into the November general midterm election, you would face. What have you been watching from the Democrat side? What are some of the things that you're hearing them message during the primary? and how do you combat some of those ideas?
What I'm hearing on the Democrat side is a lot of wanting to tax and spend, raise taxes for a host of programs. They're talking about how the government can take care of us. The government can do this for you and that for you. I believe in freedom. I believe people can make decisions for themselves and provide for themselves. So we want to lower taxes, leave the money with the people. So you hear about subsidies. We'd rather than tax people and give money back to them in subsidies, we want to just leave the money with the people and let them choose what to do for it, what to do with their own money. So I think we've had Democrat leadership in Illinois. We know what that looks like. We know that with the taxes and the host of regulations that they've enacted, businesses are leaving our state. We've had major employers, Boeing, Citadel, Tyson Foods, Caterpillar. These are huge companies that brought great jobs, high-paying jobs, and they've left the state because of the just regulatory burden and the tax burden. We want to get them back. We want to keep not just large businesses, but small businesses. We've seen a decline in small businesses. That's dangerous. Small businesses are the growth engine of the economy. They are the big businesses of tomorrow. We want to welcome them and nurture them. The Democratic leadership just in the last year has raised the filing fee, like the renewal licensing fees for small businesses, by incredible amounts. It's unaffordable. We're driving out businesses. We want to welcome businesses. We want more jobs. We want more competition. The more businesses, the more competition, prices go down. And that's lower prices for all of us. And it's more jobs so we can earn the money to pay for them. I think the people of Illinois, that's what they're looking for. They want a good economy, jobs for their kids and grandkids so they can stay here. They want safer communities, and they want an education system that's actually educating their kids and preparing them for the workforce. And that's what that's what I bring to the table. I think that message is going to resonate not just with Republicans in this primary on March 17th, but with all the voters of Illinois in November.
Jeannie Evans, one of 6 candidates on the Republican ballot to take the U.S. Senate nomination for the GOP on the March 17th ballot. You've got a whole bunch of other choices, and this is just one of them. So, Jeannie, I greatly appreciate you taking the time with us here for the Center Square Daily.
Thanks so much. And to the Republican primary voters, Jeannie Evans for U.S. Senate this Tuesday, March 17th.
And that'll do it for Illinois in Focus. This is the Center Square Daily. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. And you can join us back here Monday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.